In Paris, a professional hitman, known only as the killer, spent hours staring through a window in an old room, waiting for his target to appear in the hotel across the street. He only leaves his chair to drink water and exercise. One afternoon, he leaves the building to buy food and pretends to be a German tourist because the French always avoid such people. After ensuring his scooter is still in place, the killer gets some food at McDonald's and calls his contact. Eddie, 5 days have already passed, and he is tired of waiting, but Eddie still doesn't know when the target will appear. As soon as the call ends, the killer lets the phone drop and steps on it to destroy it. At night, he is preparing his sniper rifle when he hears a noise in the hallway. A man approaches the door and the killer is in position to shoot, but it is just the janitor leaving the mail. After observing the hotel a bit more, he brushes his teeth and makes sure to wash the sink to get rid of his DNA. Then, he lies on a table to sleep, and his watch alarm wakes him every 10 minutes so he can keep an eye on the hotel. In the middle of the night, the killer is relieved to discover that his target has finally entered the hotel room. Then he prepares his weapon and raises the table for support. He also plays music on his MP3 player, puts eye drops in his eyes, and monitors his pulse. At the hotel, a call girl is presenting herself to the target. The killer waits for the right moment to finally shoot. However, the woman takes a step forward at the same time, and the bullet ends up hitting her. Instead, he wants to shoot again, but security guards rush to close the curtains. Now, the killer has no choice but to take all his things and leave the building. He gets on his scooter and flees just before the police arrive. While driving through the city, throws his things away in the sewer and in the garbage truck. He can hear the police sirens approaching, so he has to make some sharp turns and drive down some stairs to successfully escape. Soon he reaches the river, where he abandons his scooter and throws his helmet into the water. At a gas station, the killer uses the restroom to put on new clothes and shave. He makes sure to clean the place before taking a taxi to the airport. Before getting in, he throws the last part of his weapon into a trash can. This is the first time he has failed a mission, so he becomes very nervous. When a police dog looks at him, he runs to the restroom to freshen up and calm down. Then, he calls Eddie, who reprimands him for his failure. The killer ends up hanging up in the middle of the conversation and destroys this phone as well. After showing the employees a fake identity with his ticket, he boards the plane. While waiting for takeoff, he notices a suspicious man sitting nearby. As soon as he lands at the next airport, the killer buys another ticket with a new identity. He is shocked to discover that the suspicious man is here too. So he decides to postpone his flight until the next day. At a hotel, the killer rents a room for the night and orders food. Then he places a glass and a lid on the door handle as a trap for intruders. Finally, he takes a knife and places it on a table next to a reading chair, where he spends the rest of the night. The next day he flies to the Dominican Republic and drives his Jeep to his hideout in the middle of the jungle. At the fence, he is shocked to find footprints and cigarette butts. The killer grabs his weapon and jumps the fence to run toward the house, finding more footprints along the way. There is loud music playing inside, but nothing is out of place. After turning off the music, he checks the kitchen and finds some knives on the floor next to a bloodstain. He continues searching the house and discovers a broken mirror in the bathroom, along with more bloodstains on the wall. There is also a broken window with more blood on the glass. The killer makes a call before leaving the house. Minutes later, he arrives at the hospital to check on his unconscious girlfriend, Magdala. Her brother, Marcos, tells him that a male and female assassin broke into the house to interrogate and torture her. She fought and managed to stab the man in the leg. Then, she escaped running through the window. The assassins fled by taking a taxi, and Marcos thinks they were looking for the killer and tried to kill her because she was a witness. The killer assures Marcos that this will never happen. Again, a few hours later, a doctor informs that Magdala will be transported to a private hospital, as he requested. He tries to leave a tip, but the doctor steps away. At that moment, Magdala wakes up and immediately assures the killer that she told the attackers nothing. At home, he digs in the garden to reveal a safe full of weapons. He packs all of them with his fake identities before getting into his Jeep to drive through the city, looking for the taxi that Marcos described. After several hours of driving, he still hasn't found a single clue. At night, he goes to the taxi company and threatens the manager to access the system. A quick search reveals that a man named Leo took the assassins to his house. He takes some money from a box and tosses some things to make it look like a robbery, leaving the manager tied up on the floor. The next day, the killer waits outside the taxi company until he sees Leo leave in his car and follows him to the city center. He pretends to be a tourist and hails Leo's taxi, drawing his weapon while telling him to keep driving. Leo hands over his wallet because he thinks it's a robbery, but the killer asks about the others. A terrified Leo admits that the duo seemed strange, but he took them because he needed the money. He noticed the guy's leg was bleeding, but they didn't want to go to the hospital. So, Leo dropped them off at the airport, as they requested. The killer makes him park in an abandoned area under a bridge and shoots him in the head. After that, he flies to New Orleans, where he rents a van to drive to his warehouse. He takes more identities and weapons from a trunk, as well as new plates for the van. Then he goes to a hardware store to buy some tools. In the city, the killer pretends to be a hired cleaner and enters a fancy building when they open the door for the mailman. They take the elevator together, and on the upper floor, he drinks water to buy time. The mailman doesn't close the door properly, and as soon as he leaves, the killer takes the chance to enter the office. Inside, Ed's secretary, Dolores, is terrified to see him arrive with a gun in his hand. The killer takes her computer and phone before forcing her to lead him to the office of his contact. Dolores ties Ed to his chair before going to the bathroom and tying her arm to the sink. Then the killer closes the door and asks who the two assassins at his house were. Eddie explains that he had to make a deal with a very powerful client to compensate for the failed mission, but he never expected the killer to go home. The killer uses a nail gun to destroy Ed and Dolores' computers, but Eddie keeps telling him to leave and hide in another country. When the killer continues asking for the identity of the others, Ed refuses to speak. Then he stabs him in the chest with 3 nails. The killer calls emergency services and leaves the phone on the table. Ed tries to reach it, but ends up falling, and the killer places a newspaper under his head. After just a few seconds, Ed dies. Then the killer checks on Dolores, who is taking Ed's medication to stay calm. She is willing to give him the names he needs, but in exchange, she wants him to give her a non-suspicious death so her children can receive the insurance money. The killer should ignore empathy to avoid showing weakness, but he lets her go anyway. Dolores leaves the bathroom only to faint upon seeing the body. The killer throws the body and the computers into a large trash bin and takes the elevator with Dolores. On the next floor, a tenant joins them and makes a joke about a body in the trash, making Dolores laugh nervously. After that, the killer takes her home and leaves her tied up in the van while he enters. Dolores screams and tries to free herself without success. The killer opens the garage and hides the van inside. Before he and Dolores go to her office, she teaches him how to use her address catalog, allowing him to find the mission cards with information about the two assassins and the client who paid for the failed task. Then, the killer breaks Dolores' neck and pushes her down the stairs to make it look like an accident. At the warehouse, he burns Ed's body. Later, he takes the ashes and throws them into the sea. After spending the night in a motel, the killer washes the van and puts on new plates. For the next few hours, he drives until he reaches Florida, abandons the van, and rents a car before driving to the man's house. The killer identifies his victim because he is limping. After buying some supplies, he waits in his car, parked near the house. Soon the man and some friends leave the house and drive away in their pickup truck. The killer follows him. Immediately, in the city, the pickup stops outside a club and the group enters. Then he returns to the house. and waits until his target returns. As soon as the guy is in the house, the killer approaches the fence and a dog barks at him. He throws some food mixed with a sedative, and the dog eats it without hesitation. At that moment, the owner calls her. After waiting a few minutes for the sedative to take effect, the killer crosses the gate and sneaks through the house. Nearby, the dog is snoring in its bed. The killer enters the house and begins searching the rooms one by one. Suddenly, he is knocked down by the brute, who also manages to disarm him. The men fight each other and, in the chaos, the gun ends up under the bed. The brute throws the killer through the closet window. Then he slams him on the floor to start beating him. When he steps away to get the gun, the killer takes the chance to get up, and the brute comes after him. Again, the fight continues, and the killer is thrown into the TV. Then he responds by breaking a vase over the other's head. He runs to the next room and grabs several decorations to use as weapons, only for the brute to throw him into the hallway. The men continue exchanging blows, and the killer jumps on his back to start choking him. The brute moves backward to slam the killer against the wall and falls on his back to crush him on the floor. Then he knocks him onto a glass table and tries to beat him again. However, the killer manages to get a fireplace poker and uses it as a weapon, forcing the brute to step away. He follows him and hits him with the poker before jumping behind the sofa that the brute pushes to trap him. Now the killer is close enough to hit his leg and knock him down again, but the brute throws him onto another table when he opens a drawer to get a gun. The killer hits him with the poker again and makes him fall on the leg of a table that stabs him in the back. The brute fires a few bullets, but the killer runs to hide in the kitchen, where he grabs a grater. After removing the piece of wood from his back, the brute approaches the kitchen. The killer throws the grater to make him shoot in the wrong direction and runs out of the room. Before he closes the door, the brute sees his face and recognizes him. Bleeding all over the floor, he crosses the door and tries to reach the room. However, the killer finally found his gun and shoots him first. The noise wakes the dog, who runs into the house while the killer shoots the brute in the head to finally kill him. The killer starts running while the dog smells its owner. Realizing that he is dead, she chases the killer, even jumping through a window to follow him outside. He crosses the fence and closes it tightly before the dog could reach him. Then he throws a Molotov cocktail through a window to set the house on fire. At the airport, the killer showers before boarding a plane to New York. There he rents another car and drives to the suburbs where the woman lives. After taking some medicine for his injuries, he spends the whole day waiting in his car. At night, the killer finally sees the specialist leave the house and follows her to the city. At the traffic lights, he considers shooting her, but he hears the police, so he puts his gun away. Soon, the specialist enters a restaurant. Then, the killer rushes in too and sits at her table, taking the gun from her bag. The specialist recognizes him and asks the waiter for a bottle of whiskey, wanting to spend her last moments with a good drink. She asks about Eddie and is happy to hear that he is dead. She also tries to share her food and drink, but the killer doesn't touch them. She explains that she has nothing against him or his girlfriend, just accepted a job like all contract killers do. After sharing an old tale as a metaphor for their work, the specialist wonders why the killer took such a risk and theorizes that he expected that seeing her would fill him with tranquility, as on the day he missed his shot. This makes the killer finally drink, and the specialist tells the waiters to take everything because they are finished. Outside, the duo walks in the park, and the specialist slips on the stairs. She asks for his help, but instead the killer shoots her in the head. A closer look reveals that she had a knife, and she slipped on purpose to try to trick him. Sometime later, the killer arrives in Chicago and waits outside a fancy building where the powerful man who paid for the failed mission lives. He sees him, leaving for the gym, and looks up the address on the internet. As soon as he sees a gap, the killer enters the building's garage. Unfortunately, the doors are Locked. So he takes a photo of the lock and buys some useful tools on Amazon. After that, he goes to the gym to sign up. While filling out the paperwork, he notices that he needs a special access card to access certain areas. Next, he goes to the bank and transfers all his money to his Dominican account under a fake name. At night, the killer buys a gun from a local dealer. The next morning, he picks up his package and goes to the gym. He bumps into the janitor on purpose to clone his access card using the device he bought. In the locker room, he waits until everyone has left and uses the cloned access card to open his target's locker. He checks the wallet and finds another access card which he also clones. A few hours later, the killer enters the garage the same way as last time, and this time he can access the residential area thanks to the access card. Seconds later, his target Clay is shocked to find him in his living room. He has no idea who he is. Then the killer shows the mission card. Once he understands, Clay explains that he doesn't hate the killer for failing the mission, since mistakes happen. However, Ed convinced him that the trail needed to be cleaned, and he didn't know what that meant when he paid. After hesitating, the killer chooses to believe him, although he also makes a threat. If Clay one day has him as the target again or reveals his identity to anyone, the killer will return to kill him. With these final words, he leaves. In the elevator, he destroys all the mission cards and then throws them in the street. Back to the Dominican Republic, the killer takes care of Magdala in recovery.